Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for part 2 of Mastering Customer Discovery with Josh David Miller. We're excited to dig into the second part of it. We had a great first workshop, and for those of you that didn't join us, we will be sharing that recording with you as well. So if you didn't get that, no worries. You'll be caught up to speed once you get that sent after this session. But a little bit about us at the Carlson Center, if you're not familiar with us, we serve as a regional hub and platform for providing approachable and accessible entrepreneurial education, community, and support to enable startup founders of all backgrounds to start and scale their businesses. And excited to bring this workshop series to all of you. And looking forward to diving into this very important topic around customer discovery. And today we're going to be getting into customer interviews and a variety of different topics within that space. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to JDM, who will be taking us through our workshop here today. So over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the kind intro. I appreciate it. I'm super excited to be here again, the second time in a week, and to talk more about customer discovery. We've got a lot to get through, so I say we just kind of dive in here. I am going to share my screen, and we're just going to share this one here. And that should be visible.
You got it. We see it.
Excellent. I'm going to take one moment to pull up the chat list. That way I can see. Zoom, of course, hides it when you go to do the screen share because Zoom knows best. Whoop there. And chat. Thank you. Okay. Don't want to stay completely out of the loop with y'all. That's it. That's it. And I can't actually set that up until you screen share, which is Zoom limitation. But you did not come here to hear me vent about Zoom, though I could fill the entire hour with a vent on Zoom, and I do have recommendations for alternatives should that be your bag. But to the topic at hand, we're going to talk about customer discovery. But as Cameron mentioned, we're going to stop kind of in one big area of the customer discovery process. What I would argue is the most important area of the customer discovery process, which is the customer interview. I really want to get you guys to a point where you can master that. So we're going to talk 30,000-foot view. We're going to do a little recap for those who missed last week of customer discovery, but we're not going to spend much time there. Then we're going to go into customer interviews. We're going to talk about how you do it, why you do that, some tools, tips, techniques, mistakes that are commonly made, and so forth to go through that process. And then we're actually going to workshop it a little bit. We're gonna go through and actually do some practice interviews on some questions that don't matter at all. That way we can get a feel for it. There's really nothing like actually getting through to the process. So I hope you guys stick around for the breakout rooms, just like we did last time, Cameron, about 4 people per room or fewer. Okay, cool. With that, let's go to this. So first things first. I would love if you guys are working on something cool or interesting, or even if it's only cool or interesting to you, or frankly, if you're working on something you find quite dull and boring, go ahead and throw it in the chat. Love to hear just kind of the space that we're operating in. Won't be super critical to today's conversation, but if you throw that in, and when we start getting to examples of things, I might in real time throw an example that's more relevant to you. So while you guys are doing that, again, we're going to be talking about customer interviews, and I should probably start by saying who I am and why you should care about what I have to say about customer interviews. So I will say my name is JDM, aka Josh David Miller. I have a lot of nicknames in the ecosystem here, but none of them are flattering. So we'll just go ahead and move on. From there. You probably, as you want to know why you should listen to me about this, you probably shouldn't, but if I were to give you a reason, I would say it's 2 things. One, I've seen some things. I've been around the block a few times. I've worked with, I've helped launch more than 100 products, participated in 500 or so innovations, and facilitated 100 plus traction events with startup companies, and I've heard about 3,000 startup pitches. So I'm not a neophyte by any means for this, but neither am I an old hand. I like to think I'm still young and innovative and in the process, but that might just be something I tell myself as I head closer and closer toward 40. The second thing that I'll say about myself is that those things that I've seen with some other cool people over the years. So here are just some logos, logo. All right, I'm done. Let's dive in. But before we actually like get super deep into customer interviews, the context from last week is important. So in case you missed it, we're going to do a quick recap. And for those of you who were here last week, this will be a nice refresher. So, first, why are we talking about any of this? Why are we talking about this whole thing of customer discovery? Like, why is that a thing at all? And it's because startups aren't small versions of big businesses. There's a lot of different definitions out there for what a startup is. My favorite is the one I've included here, which is from Steve Blank, which is that they're organizations in search of a business model. And the idea there is that if you're let's say working at a really well-established company, a Toyota, a Subway franchise, something like that, and you want to launch a new product, you dive into your data. You dive into the data and you say, okay, who here, who buys our Subway sandwiches? Who buys this kind of bread versus that kind of bread? Who gets lettuce? Who gets tomato? Who gets meat versus who gets a vegetarian patty versus who just gets cheese? Who gets this kind of sauce and that kind of sauce? And who gets it toasted and untoasted? And who gets a cookie with it and a meal and chips? And we can get all that because we have all of this data. Same thing with a car. We know who buys cars with 4 doors, 2 doors, 3 doors. The 5th door, we know who buys cars with the luggage rails on the top, and who buys the self-driving cars, and who buys cars with et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have all this data. So what we can do is we can look at the pool, the universe of people who buy cars or buy sandwiches, and we can look at our data on people who've bought our cars and our sandwiches, and we can look for a gap and say, okay, I think if we built a sandwich that looked like this, or we built a car that looked like that, there's a hole in the market that we can kind of plug in and fill that gap. So it's great. But when we're working on a startup, we don't have any of that data. We don't know who our customer is. We don't know what value prop's going to resonate with them. We don't know how we're actually going to create that value that we're going to end up creating. We don't know if when we create that value, how we're even going to get it in front of customers in the first place. We don't know how or why this will make money. And honestly, we don't even know if we're really onto something. We think we are. That's why we're spending our time on it, but we don't know. And so therefore, we can't go through the same process that you would go through for a Subway or a Toyota. We're doing something innovative. We need a different process called customer discovery. And the core of it is just that you have to co-create your business with your customer. That's the long and the short of it. Is that since you don't have any of that information, you are, as we often like to say, startups are like flying a plane while you're building it, right? That's what we mean, is that at the same time as you're evolving the market, you're evolving the product. And both of those things are evolving together. So you work with customers literally to figure out what you're going to build. The whole business is co-created with customers. That's a key difference. And that customer discovery is like this 4-step process. And the first step here, which we call customer discovery, it's the first step of the search phase. This is about where we hypothesize about a model that we want to test. And once we have an hypothesis of the model we want to test, we can move into customer validation, where we test that model in search of what we call traction. Customers saying yes in the market, yes, I have that problem. Yes, I want a solution. Yes, I want your solution, that kind of thing. And once we kind of have that kind of cool little, this makes sense, and customers are early saying yes, we can move into execution, where we begin to execute on that model and scale the organization. That's customer creation. And then eventually we can transition to an organization that's focused on execution, on efficiency, and on scale. And so that's the MBA work. That's not the entrepreneur work. That's the MBA work, right? So just focusing on the very first step of this 4-step to the epiphany process, customer discovery. I'll throw it down into just a couple of slides as a crash course. So first is that customer discovery. The first step is a systematic, qualitative approach to understanding customer problems at an extraordinarily deep level, and then using that information to ideate around potential solutions and eventually test those with real customers. That's the goal of that step, right? This qualitative process of research whereby we try to figure out problems, figure out if we can solve them, and figure out if we know the right solution to them. And that leads to how we know we're done with customer discovery. When do we move on from customer discovery into customer validation? We do that when we've developed a business model hypothesis, when we know, like, okay, this is what we think the thing is. And then we also need a customer that we can really easily get in front of, that we can say with high confidence has the problem that we think that they do, or what we call customer problem fit. Once you have a business model hypothesis with a customer who we know has that problem and a value proposition that we can put in front of them, then we can actually go and validate. That's how we know what we have to validate, right? So that's kind of it. And so that all of this customer discovery process is built on the same question, which is, who is the customer? right? At the core, who is the person that we're trying to get in front of, right? And more than that, once we have the person we're trying to get of, do they have the problem that we think that they do? And when we say that do we have the problem, we don't just mean it's like, oh, theoretically, hypothetically, do they have this particular issue? We mean like, do they have this problem and are experiencing it with such urgency and severity that they're demanding a solution right freaking now? That's what we're going for at the end of the day. Okay. Who's the customer and do they have the problem you think they do? So that leads us logically to how do you find that out? How do we actually engage? So like last time we talked about, oh, here's our customer personas, but we never really talked about like how you actually get that information to fill out the customer persona in the first place. So how do you actually find that out? Well, I've spoiled it. The answer is customer interviews. There are other tools too, which we might have time to talk about later, but principally it is this process of customer interviews. So let's do a little hypothetical. Before we dive in, a little hypothetical. So let's say I have a startup idea. Let's say my startup idea is for the Cord Cutter Wine Club. And this is a weekly wine subscription service that delivers a wine perfectly matched to a movie in your or TV series, say in your Netflix or Amazon or Hulu or Disney Plus watch list, right? So that is our business. I'm going to pretend to be a customer, and I would like a volunteer to interview me real quick. We'll take 60 seconds to do it. Who wants to take the leadership role here? Otherwise, Cameron's just going to point at somebody.
I mean, I could do it.
Go ahead, Robert.
So
All right.
how does it work? Sorry.
Yeah, no, we're just doing a little customer interview right now. You are the founder you have this crazy idea for the Cord Cutter Wine Club, as I've outlined here. I'm a potential customer that you're talking to do an interview to do a little customer discovery. Proceed.
Okay. So I just ask a simple question or a few questions, correct?
Do it however you think you should.
How often do you drink wine?
Oh, that's a personal question. I probably have a glass a week, maybe.
That's a week. Do you have any other different alcoholic beverages?
No, wine is my preferred beverage of choice.
So what makes you interested in possibly watching sorry, I'm trying to like read this at the same time.
It's all right. I'll take a sip of this coffee.
That delivers a wine perfectly.
It's coffee. It's not wine. If this was a little later in the day, I might just have a glass of a nice Grenache or something here, but I don't. So.
Yeah, I don't know how to do this. Sorry.
No, that's fair. That's fair because I haven't told you yet, and it's hard. Okay, so so I will say, Robert, you started out super strong. So you asked open-ended questions about like how often do I drink wine because you're trying to discover like am I even like if I don't drink wine, then this is like you're talking to the wrong dude, right? So you start off like just with that, and also if I say that I have a drink every 6 months or something like that, also not super interesting. You asked if it was wine versus another thing like a cocktail or a beer or something like that, because that would also mean that I'm not your customer. So no, you did great, Robert. Thank you very much for volunteering and being what I definitely referred to as the hapless victim of this process. So I want to talk a little bit more about what went well with that, and then where we can kind of take some opportunities to make that a little bit better. But we're not going to talk about the questions that you asked specifically, Robert. As I said, you started off super strong. So the first thing that I really want to if you take nothing else away from this conversation that we're having here, it's this: that you can't just ask customers. You can't just ask customers about your product. You can't ask them if they'd use it, because they will lie right to your face. They will absolutely lie right to your face. Every single time you're going to get liars up and down, and they're going to think that they're doing you a favor, and I'm going to prove it to you now. So get ready with your keyboards. I want you to throw something in the chat just a second. All you, not just Robert. Okay, so you go to a restaurant and you have this thoroughly mediocre meal, you and your friends, and it's not bad. The food's not terrible. Like, it tasted fine, but it wasn't amazing. It was just meh, it's mediocre, it's fine, it's whatever. And then at the end, waiter comes up and he says, so, ladies and gentlemen, how was the food? Throw in the chat, what's your response? Oh, Kinsey's being way nicer. Oh, Robert's even. Oh, everybody's okay. Yes, exactly. That's what we say. We say it's good, right? It's good. And it's different than what I expected. All right, Katerina's got a good. I think it's different than what I expected. That invites a follow-up question from the waiter. So that was mostly what we do. We used to say it was good. Almost everybody's going to give that some variation of that same response. And the reason that we do that is that we don't like to disappoint people. We don't like confrontation. We don't like conflict. We don't like, with the exception of Lena, apparently, who is just going straight out the gates for conflict with hers. But by and large, people just don't want that. And so we don't like to upset people. We don't like to disappoint people. We don't like to hurt people's feelings. There's all these things that could happen by us doing that. And what do we really get? Like the food, we didn't send the food back. It wasn't terrible. It was just fine. We probably won't come back. But you know what? If our friends really wanted us to, I guess, yeah, we'd return. Again, wasn't bad, right? It's just mediocre. And mediocre kills startups. Mediocre kills businesses. Mediocre kills restaurants. And but we don't want to upset the waiter. We just don't. And we know, and this is the kicker here, we know that the waiter doesn't care. Unless you're like dining at the French Laundry or something like that, right? Where this is like, these are people who they're serious about food service. It is a career for them. They are well paid. Unless they're in that space, right, where they're delivering an experience through food, we know that they don't care. And the only reason they came up at the end of the day, at the end of the meal, to ask us about it was because it's of social formality. They do that because they work on tips. And we know that. We know they don't care, and we still won't be honest. And so when you go and start talking to people about your startup, they know you care. They know that you care already. So the best case scenario is that they disappoint you and hurt your feelings. The worst case scenario is they're in an uncomfortable conflict with a complete stranger. It's terrible. So what you need instead is a different technique, a different tool set. And I'm going to give you a cheater here. The cheat is called a mom test. The idea here is that you ask a question such that even if you asked your own mother, she'd have no choice but to tell you the truth. That's a question that passes the mom test. So here's one that does not pass the mom test. Hey, mom, do you like my startup idea? What do you think about this? What does mom say? Mom says, oh, honey, it's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Don't forget about me when you're a billionaire hobnobbing with Elon Musk. It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be awesome. Mom's gonna cheerlead us on through the whole process. So it's not helpful to us. What we want to do is ask a question such that even if we asked our own mother, we'd have no choice but to tell the truth. Now I can see Lena says not her mother, which also probably explains why she went straight for conflict with the waiter. But yes, most of us aren't in that same boat. So how can we ask a question in a way that even your own mother would have no choice but to tell you the truth? And I'm going to talk about that at the meta level, and then we're going to get super specific. So at the meta level, what we're trying to do is align what she thinks that we want to hear with what we need to hear. So what we need to hear is whether or not we're onto something. That's what we need to hear. But what she thinks we want to hear is encouragement and positive reinforcement and all those cheerleading things that parents, particularly in the United States, do to try to support their children. So we need to align the want to hear and need to hear, because right now they're misaligned. And if we misalign them, most of the time, mom's going to go with want and not need, because she doesn't even know the need, frankly. So here's some specific things that you can do in order to do that. First is you can ask her to tell you a story. Hey, mom, tell me about a time when. Have you ever encountered this particular problem? Oh, that's interesting. So, mom, what did you try? Oh, okay. You tried this, and did you ever try this other thing? Oh, you did. Okay. So why didn't that work? Oh, okay. So what do you think you're going to try next time? How much did it cost to try that thing? Oh, did it cost you any, did you lose any money by it not working the first time? Right? All those questions align what you need to know with what your mom thinks you want to know, because all she knows is that you're asking a pretty straightforward question. In other words, what you're trying to do is ask about past behavior. Ask about things that already happened, because if you're asking about things that already happened, they really don't have any reason to lie to you. They just don't. They're going to tell you exactly what you're asking because you've given them no reason not to. diving in a little bit more to stories, what we're after is what philosophers call the qualia, right? So these are trying to get to this experience that they went through, so that we can understand their internal experience and begin to empathize with them on a very, very deep and actually pretty profound level. So that's what we start with, this like, have you ever questions. And this is where, like, to go back to Robert, and thanks again for volunteering, where I would have taken the conversation next was to ask if they've ever, like, do they ever drink wine with Netflix? What was that like? And try to explore that space a bit more, right? Because now we can get to my past behavior on that, which is the best possible predictor of my future behavior. So then we can say, okay, now what was that like? What were some problems I had with that? How did that make you feel? What did you try? Why didn't that work? To really get at the experience that's underneath the surface for people. Past behavior always. Okay. Now let's talk about some mistakes. So a really common mistake that people make is ignoring context. Whatever problem a customer has, it occurs within the context of their life. And whatever solution we're planning on introducing also exists within the context of their life. So here's this way this like manifests itself all the time. So we talked to a bunch of customers. We discovered that like we've really cleanly identified this group of people really have the problem and they want a solution. Actually, they're like, yes, please, I'd love a solution to this because this really frickin' sucks. And then when you tell them about your solution, they're on board. They're like, yes, I like this solution. But they never buy, or they sign up for the free trial, but they never convert to the premium version. Why? Anybody got any guesses? Why in this case they don't buy? They have the problem, they want a solution, they like yours, but they don't buy. And let's assume all throughout the process, all of your interrogations went through the mom test. You've removed the bias, they are telling you the truth. Why don't they buy? I shall buy time for your responses with a drink of coffee. Okay. All right. So we've got some good product related stuff here. Like Luciano is talking about too much friction. So friction could always be a reason that they aren't early adopters, says Kinsey. Perhaps say more, Kinsey, in the chat about what you mean in that context. Nam says because of the price. Yeah, it certainly could be price. Let's see, not sure it'll work. They don't want to take a chance. They don't see the value, maybe, or it doesn't solve a problem I have or that I know I have. So in this case, the example is that they do have the problem. They say that they have the problem. They say that they want a solution. They say they want your solution, and then they don't buy anyway. Oh, so Cameron's taking it in a different direction here. It isn't that urgent or severe of a pain point. And that's interesting because it's also the right answer. So all those other things can cause problems, right? So friction causes problems for sure. Pricing, you could be charging the wrong amount. You could be charging the wrong way, right? Maybe they don't want a monthly subscription. It's something, right? So Kinsey, getting at the exact same thing. It's number 11 on their top 10 list of problems, right? Meaning they're not going to pay anybody to solve it, even though it would be really nice, if it got solved. So when we talk about why customers buy something, they buy something because they need a solution to it, right? And so to put that a different way, like I like to say, desirability is the intersection of severity and urgency. And so there is I'll share a link later in this so you can actually read more about this. I have a little chart that you can go through as well to kind of graph severity and urgency and follow all that. But for now, just picture like severity and urgency as a graph, and the customers who have the most severe pain and the most urgent need to solve it are the ones that you really want to go after. Now, those tend to be your early adopters, to Kinsey's point, right? So those are the ones that have really strong desirability for this thing right now. The severity and urgency indicates how important it is within the context of their life. So if it, Kinsey joked about it being number 11 on their top 10 list of priorities, but if it's problem number 4 on their list of priorities, they're probably still not going to buy because 3 things are more important right now. And so that's one of the things that is really commonly, is why I called it a blunder. It's because you'll start asking questions, you'll be getting all this great feedback, and you'll think that means you could double down and make a bigger bet. You build a thing and you offer it to customers, and I see it all the time. I literally see it every week with startups. It's that common. It's because that context of their life was missing. So when you go back and you're asking these open-ended questions to customers, it's important to understand how this sits within the context of their life. How are they spending their time? How are they spending their money? What are the other problems that they have? Do not ignore that customers have other shit going on that you're not trying to solve. Because if you don't know that, you can absolutely dramatically miss the mark, and you'll never really know why, because all the signals pointed to yes. So put the problem and solution in the context of their life. I see Robert's hand went up, so go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so when interviewing and researching your customer base or what you're seeking the issue, when is it enough? Like, okay, I've interviewed this many people, I got this much feedback. When is it like, okay, I found the solution or I found the problem, now try to find the solution? So when should you stop essentially?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So one of the things, and I didn't explain it on the diagram, but let me throw back to that customer discovery chart here. Whoop, whoop, there it is. Okay, so you can see that there's this line between customer discovery and customer validation that they call pivot, right? It's pivot or persevere, and it's inside that search process. And so that's the first thing that's important to understand, is that customer discovery is not a one and done thing. It's probably, we do customer discovery, again, we're trying to come up with this hypothesis that we can test, and we move into customer validation, we test it, we're probably wrong. We need to go back and build on our customer discovery, maybe find a new customer, or maybe find a subsegment of the customer, or maybe tweak the value proposition a little bit, or tweak the product or delivery mechanism or something like that. We tweak it and then we go back into customer validation. So the first thing to understand is that it's a cycle. So you don't want to try to do this as like, let me put in so much effort that I'm kind of done with this forever. It's like, let me put in enough effort that it warrants making a bet about validating something. And the lightest and cheapest and most efficient way that you can validate that is better. So the question of like, how do you know when? The first one is when you know enough that it feels right to make a bet, that it feels right to make a bet on validation, that to do a little rapid prototype or a landing page test or something else. So that's that's like a vague kind of ephemeral response, like when it feels right. The more specific one, I would say, it's not a number of customers. It is when you can consistently identify a customer that will give you a high positive response. So let's say like you go out and you talk to, I'm going to go forward in slides while I do this. Let's say you go and talk to 10 customers, and with those 10 customers, 3 of them have the problem that you think that they do. Okay, that's not fantastic, but it's fine. So then you go, okay, so what makes the 3 different from the other 7 of the 10 that I talked to? And so then you figure out like, okay, I actually do want to serve these 3. It's not a mistake that the 7 aren't included. I really do want to serve these 3. So then you identify how they're different, and then you try to go find another 10 that look like the 3. And the second time, you're getting 6 people out of 10 that have that. Okay, great. What makes the 6 different than the 4? Right? And you keep getting this until until eventually you're like, I know who my customer is. I can get 10 out of 10 in front of these customers. I can identify them that specifically, that I can go out and find them, get in front of them with a problem. Then you do the same thing with the solution. And once you get that level of predictability that the value proposition will resonate with them, that the solution you're offering is something that they want, then that would be when I would move on to the next step and like build something to validate. But that happens a lot faster than I'm making it sound. Like this discovery, like validation loop, you can enter into like day by day by day by day. It's not something like we spend weeks. It just depends on how quickly can you get in front of customers, and what's your learning curve when you're actually talking to them. So we can get into more specifics during the Q&A at the end if you want to, if it's specific to something you're working on. That's a general idea. And that'll segue kind of into the next topic. Is what we're trying to do here is qualitative research and not quantitative research. And that's why I can't say, oh, you need to go talk to 38 people, because once you hit 38 people saying yes, then you're on the right track. We're not doing that level of research, because it's 38 out of how many. Do we have a representative sample size? I don't know, right? And then because we don't really even know who the customer is, we're trying to figure it out as we go. We're trying to build the plane as we're flying it. We're trying to do all that. So what we're trying to do is qualitative experience. We're trying to understand what people are going through, what their internal experience is, and do they have problems, and do they want want solutions. Now, how urgent is it and how severe is it? And then when you move into validation is when you start to do some quantitative research. So you're still doing a lot of qualitative research, but you're doing a little bit of quantitative as well. And then when you move on from there and you get into like customer creation, that moves basically from like, 60% qualitative and 40% quantitative to like 70% quantitative and only like 30% qualitative. And then once you're in company building, qualitative is kind of out the window. You're just playing a numbers game at that point. So it's like we're doing that mixture. It's like until we can science the shit out of this, we don't try to science the shit out of it. We do qualitative research in order to come up with an hypothesis that we can actually scientifically test. So a few more tips for this process. So one is do not write a script. Everybody wants to do this. Everybody wants to say, let me create a script. I'm going to ask questions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of customers. Like they're the ones telling you their story. You can't script their story for them. If you tried to script their story for them and you were able to do it successfully, there was nothing for you to learn from this conversation. So you don't want to try to do that. You want to ask open-ended questions, stay in the moment, stay in the chaos with them, and just hear what they're talking about, have a free-flowing conversation. And the reason for that is that scripts close doors. So if you say, I want to ask these 4 questions or these 5 questions, and something comes up in conversation, we're never going to explore it because we had these 5 questions that we wanted to get through. And that behind those doors are usually the most valuable and interesting business opportunities. They're not what we thought of the first time. There's something we just discover while talking to people. And so don't write scripts. It's okay to say, here's the kind of things that I want to learn, and that's great. But don't literally say, I have 4 questions for you, and I want to ask these 4 questions. Have that open-ended conversation and sit in that like uncomfortable mess for a while. Related to that, please don't run a survey. A lot of people want to write these like general surveys and send it out on the internet, like, oh, let me just post this type form onto our Google form or whatever onto my Facebook account or onto my Twitter. And I'm not going to call it X, I'm going to call it Twitter, and see kind of what happens there, and I'll get all my responses. Unless you have the following, unless you have a degree and some advanced training in being as a pollster, you're not going to do a good job. You're going to suck at it. Don't do it. Second, unless you have a deep and detailed understanding of who your customer is, such that you're able to develop a representative sample size, which if you're doing anything innovative, you don't and you can't, so you shouldn't, right? Then you don't want to try down that process at all. Surveys are for pollsters. Like, we're not doing surveys, we're not doing scripts, we're asking open-ended conversations to get qualitative customer experiences. So with that, we are going to move into an activity. But before we do that, I actually just realized that this barcode is wrong. So don't scan that barcode. I'm going to get that barcode off the screen. I am instead going to put into the chat the link that was supposed to be pointing to. Right here in the chat. Okay, so there we go. If you hit up this link here, you'll get a little page where you can throw in your email address. And if you do the thing, you'll get back a Notion page that has the slides here, including the slides that are coming up. There's about 6 more slides left. You'll a bunch of other resources, a couple of YouTube videos, some articles that you can read, all in diving deeper into customer discovery, into customer interviews, and so forth. So you can do all of that and get just kind of get access to that just by clicking that link. Also, if it's your bag, and if it's not, that's totally cool. I'm having fun here with y'all today. But if it's your bag, I have an entire self-directed online course launching in a couple of weeks, all on customer discovery. It's called Mastering Customer Discovery, and you can guess what the subject is. And so it's all on everything we talked about here and more. There's details in there, and there is a promo code for like half off, just for you guys, because you're cool, and you decided to hang out with me today. If it's your back, if it's not, totally cool. That's fine. We're gonna have some fun anyway. So that's that link. Get the slides, get the additional resources. That's all cool. Okay, now let's move into our activity. So we're gonna do some practice interviews. So what we're gonna do, while Cameron's getting breakout rooms ready, we're gonna get into groups of about 4. I think we have 13 people here. Let's do groups of 3 instead, Cameron. Let's do groups of 3. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take turns. You're going to do an interview of one other. So one of you is going to interview one other person in the group. So the third person's just watching. And then you're going to do an interview for 4 minutes. Then you're going to debrief as a whole group of 3 for 1 minute about what you learned. And then you're going to switch. And second person's going to interview one of the 2 people, and then 1 minute debrief, and then a third person for 4 minutes, and then 1 minute debrief. So that's the cycle we're going to do. So everybody gets a chance to interview somebody else in the group. And because what we're working on can be kind of difficult to, assuming you're even working on something, it could be difficult to kind of get our cognitive biases out of the way. And probably the person in the room isn't your customer. So instead, we're actually going to use the topics that I'm going to give you here. So I actually have some topics for you guys to actually interview about that should be fine for you guys to get some substantive and interesting learnings to really practice these skills. So that's what we're gonna do there. What you're looking for when you're having this conversation, you're looking for unmet problems. You're looking for that severity. You're looking for that urgency. And you just want to ask around in that space to really understand their experience to try to get to that. And then there's a question in the chat. I will hit that after the activity. Okay, so here are the interview topics. I have 4 here, so it's only 3 of you. You guys get to pick which ones you want to use, but you can ask about restaurant preferences and habits, like where people dine, how people dine, how often they dine, all that kind of stuff, to see if you can understand that space a little bit better. You can ask them about movies and TV shows. You can pick that topic as well. What's their approach to childcare? How does that work? And then since it's the season for it, Halloween decorations and whether or not they do that, and how they approach that. So 3 groups of 3 you'll have, and then probably one group of, nope, probably just groups of 3, because it looks like a couple people signed off. Nobody likes activities. Why practice skills when I can just read things and never do? So thank you for those of you who are participating. So there we go. Cool. Thanks for dropping that in the chat, Cameron, because we'll lose the screen share when we do that. And speaking of which, I'm going to go ahead and kill the screen share. And with that, any questions on the exercise itself?
Do we have to like interview as if we don't even know this person whatsoever? Like a random person on the street?
No, if you know the person, I mean, like we're not doing role play, so it's whoever's in the room. Play yourselves, answer the questions honestly, ask the questions honestly. So if you know them, that's fine. The one of the ways that I suggest actually approaching the process of doing custom interviews is starting with people you know. Start with family, then friends, then acquaintances, and eventually you get to strangers. It allows us to build confidence, validate some questions in a really low pressure environment before we can get out further. There's nothing wrong with interviewing people you know.
All right.
Any other questions?
All right. I will open up the rooms.
Let's do it.
Hop on in. I think we have the group back, so take it away, JD.
All right. Well, as we started right before we resumed recording here, I just kind of want to do a little popcorn debrief, and just for a few minutes, and then we'll do Q&A for whatever you guys want to talk about. I know we already have a question in the queue from Kinsey, excuse me. Yeah. How did it go? What did you learn? Don't be shy.
I interviewed Doug, and we talked about Halloween costumes, and found out that he would like to participate in Halloween, but nobody comes out to his house because he lives in an area where there's a lot of space between houses, and so no one really decorates, no one really participates. There'd be 4 or 5 kids in total, so he would definitely not be a vibrant customer, maybe a latent customer down the road, but not a prospect at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So that's awesome, because like what you're talking about there is just that kind of exclusionary criteria, right? Like, you know, the people who live in like in a very rural area, those are not our customer, right? So like, let's not talk to those guys. Let's talk to more of these guys.
Yeah, right.
That's awesome. That's good. What else we got?
Doug, I think are you trying to say something, Doug? You're just muted, just as a heads up.
I didn't find the questions intrusive. I thought they were interesting questions to respond to.
Oh, good. Ideally, the customer interviews are not intrusive. They can be, but there's actually a whole set of things you can do to try to avoid it. In fact, I was working with a student group from UC Davis in the spring, and they were actually doing a new STD test kit. So you can imagine, yeah, their customer interview questions could get a little awkward. But it actually works out really well. And we were doing a workshop just like this, and they were like, I don't know, like, can you even do this? I'm sure, like, interview me. And they're like, what? I'm like, interview me. Because there are lots of ways that you can actually do to, even if you're working on something really crazy, to avoid that. But just by asking people about their experience, it's disarming, right? It's conversational. It's like, we want to know. It's not, we don't feel like you gotta buy it, it's sale, it's kind of cool. Anything else?
I worked with Doug and Tom, and what I suggested at the end, instead of going to rural areas, how about go near elementary schools, middle schools, where there's primarily children within that vicinity. So it'd be a better interviewing those people, because children love to celebrate Halloween. There's more decorations out, hitting those houses or whatnot. So.
Mm-hmm. So that's great. I don't know if you're right. Not for me to say, but what you did was develop an hypothesis. Like, okay, so we're talking about this, and it makes sense that a customer who looks like this is going to be more likely to, and so therefore you want to try to talk to them. And so it's great. So then you develop that hypothesis, and you try to talk to 5 or 10 customers who look like that, and you find out if you're right, and if not, you pivot. There's, I could think of another group of people, or they're probably a much smaller group of people, but depending on what you're selling, are the people who are really into Halloween and like really do like elaborate decor. That's my brother. My brother's in that category. He has no kids, and but that's a smaller market. But if you're doing like if you're doing something that's more expensive and that's more serious, quote unquote, then a smaller market can work well, because the parents aren't really going to buy it, or at least not right away, because they're going about the less expensive decor, for example, right? So there's all kinds of different hypotheses that you can come up with, but you're thinking about it exactly right. Luciano says I need to ask Kinsey about his island food choice. That was me asking Kinsey about his island food choice.
Oh yes. Yeah, I'm really resistant to like calling out favorites. So Luciano had to work pretty hard to get me to like identify a favorite cuisine. So that was, it kind of came down to like, well, yeah, if you're on an island, what kind of food would you eat? Only one choice. Like, oh, okay, you got me. That was good.
Oh, I see. I interpreted it as cuisine that comes from the islands. I'm like, is this Caribbean food? Is this like South Pacific food? Polynesian food?
No.
I see. Got it. I'm in the same way. I hate when people ask me about my favorite something. I'm like, well, it depends on my mood, man. I like food. Mm-hmm. So you're right. So like, and that's the kind of thing actually comes super interesting, is that when you start talking to people in the real world, when you're doing things like that, is sometimes can be like really interesting insights into people. It's like, like if I try to go down that road, it actually causes people to shut down, and I don't want to go down. I don't want them to shut down. So I need to find like a different way in. There's for those of you who want to like really understand how to ask good questions, there's a great book by Andrew Warner. I think it's called Stop Asking Questions, and it's all about how to ask good questions. Mm-hmm. But Stop Asking Questions is it's based on his experience as a podcast host. So Andrew Warner hosts a pretty successful podcast about startup founders. You may have actually heard it. I'm just blanking on the name. And he really gets them to talk about things that a lot of times startup founders really don't want to talk about. And he has all kinds of tips and tricks and techniques you can use to get information out of people. So it's kind of fun. A lot of it isn't applicable to customer discovery, but some of it is. So if you want to like learn how to ask kind of sideways questions to get at what you want, it's a really good book. Okay, so Kinsey did ask a question earlier. So do you have any techniques for getting these interviews set up? What hit rates should I expect? Any wording, thoughts, ideas for making people less suspicious? Yeah, so a couple of things. I can't speak to the hit rate because that's going to be specific to the customer and everything else. But techniques for getting in front of them. So first things first is you want to go where the customers already are. And part of what we're trying to figure out through customer discovery is where customers are that we can easily and cheaply get in front of. So if we have to work really hard for every single customer we find, that's fine in the short term, but it's going to kill our startup in the long term because we need to get in front of them cheaply and quickly and easily. So as we, like, if we do all this legwork to try to find the first couple, some of the things we should be talking to them about is where they get their information, how they make decisions, and so forth, so that we can figure out how to get in front of people just like them without so much legwork, right? So that's part of the process is figuring out exactly how you get in front of them. Short version though is like if you have an hypothesis like, oh, we want to get in front of, parents of school-age children because they're likely to like Halloween decor, and that's our hypothesis, then you want to say, okay, where are all the places that, these parents of school-age children hang out? Well, they go to Target, they go to Walmart, they're on Instagram, they're on YouTube, they're on other places, and we can get a lot more specific than that. We can come to 20, 30, 40 places. The one Robert came up with was like literally in front of elementary schools, which if you do carefully won't result in a red dot above your house on certain websites. But there is something to that. They do literally hang out there. And so so like that's a channel, right? So you make a list of all these channels and you figure out like which of these has the most parents for the least effort. And then you try to find which one of those channels that is best to do. And then you run an experiment on that channel, try to get in front of some customers and see if it works. And you just iterate on that. That's called growth hacking, actually. That's all growth hacking is that process. So that's kind of how you go about the process of getting in front of them. The second part of this is actually really great. The like wording for or thoughts to make people less suspicious. It's actually way more simple than we think. Because the biggest thing, like people actually like to help other people. We do. People like to help other people. By and large, people are good. What people don't want is to be sold to, and that's the suspicion. Is that if you're like, I want to talk to you about this product I'm working on, we all get that email. We all get that LinkedIn message. It's like we're immediately suspicious, and we're probably never going to respond anyway. So your hit rate's going to take like a big hit. That's a terrible way to phrase that. You'll notice a big drop in your hit rate. There we go. So what you want to do is actually take the sale off the table, because you probably don't have anything to sell right now anyway. And if you do, it'll present itself because they're gonna be like, oh my God, like take my money, right? Like if that happens, that's fantastic. But we're not going into this to make a sale. We're going into this to get information. So we just want to be transparent about that. A really good example of how to do this well is if let's say you're doing B2B and your customers are on LinkedIn. And so you want to send an in-mail. People who are on LinkedIn a lot, people like me, we get spam every single day on LinkedIn. Cameron probably gets even more than I do. And so you have to find a way to cut through the noise and decrease the suspicion. And here's a good trick. And you can translate this to whatever medium you find your customers in. Same principles is to ask for help, right? To say, hey, I'm trying to understand, customer behaviors in this particular category because I have, kind of some ideas from a startup, but I'm still like in really early validation stages. I have nothing to sell. I'm just really curious to hear your thoughts as an experienced person in this field, right? So you're asking for their help and then flattering them at the same time. And then the second part of it that you can do is signal how much you value their time. And on LinkedIn, really awesome way to do this is to actually offer them money, is to say like, something like, I know your time is I know you're busy and your time is super valuable. So if you let me know your hourly rate, I'll be happy to pay it. In the years that I've been giving that same advice to entrepreneurs, and in the years I've heard other people give the same advice to entrepreneurs, I have never heard one time of any one customer even giving a dollar value, let alone asking for money. What you're doing is signaling that you value their time and that's what it's about. So you're disarming them, flattering them, and asking for help, and people are genuinely nice anyway. So do those kinds of things to actually increase your hit rate there. But I can't tell you what the hit rate should be because it's going to depend too much on the thing. I will say, like for advertising, for example, if you're trying to reach out to people on LinkedIn DMs, just to continue with the same example, you should be able to expect about a 2% response rate, 2 to 3%. If you follow these techniques, you'll get higher. because you're not trying to sell something, and that 2 to 3% is assuming that you're trying to sell something. If you're breaking 10%, you're kind of doing well. If you're breaking 50%, you are on to something, right? So what else you got? Any other questions? All right. While you're thinking, I'll drop one last time into the chat that link in case you want the slides or anything else. There they are. And actually, I just realized we're out of time.
Yep.
So cool. Oh, last thing I'll say is if you hit this link and you throw in your email address and it emails you the thing, that comes from me. So if you have a question that we didn't get to, or you think of it later, you can literally just hit reply to that email, and it's me. It goes to my inbox. I will happily field your questions. So feel free to send me an email. Is my way of saying that. So thanks for having me, Cameron. It was a lot of
Awesome.
fun. Hopefully people got
Thank
fired
you.
up about customer discovery.
Yep, got some great feedback on the exercise and practice there. So thanks for helping facilitate that and get that engagement. And thank you all for coming and enjoying and taking part in the discussion and role playing. Always fun to get some of those reps out of the way. And thank you, JDM, for coming in and leading this 2-part series, and look forward to sharing that knowledge with our continued community growing. So appreciate you all and look forward to seeing you about the ecosystem. Have a great one.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.